he owns a gym. I'm 24 and I crush barbells. I can clean and jerk 350, but my demo is like house moms, and it's like, what do you mean you can't do this and then this? It's like, well, I'm 42 with 3 kids, and I was up with my kid throwing up last night. Yeah, and so it's like, what did you just put on this board? Like, I can't do this. So yeah, it's like you have to be really connected with who your avatar is. Like, if you were to like create a collection of all the members in your gym and make like a bell curve, what is the avatar person at that top of the bell? And you have to program for that person and then provide scaling down options as well as scaling up options.
The Fitness Movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all one place, zorfitness.com. Today we're going to be talking about programming for groups again. Previously we basically showed you outsource your affiliate programming. We'll expand a bit and continue our conversation from that. So Chris and I, largely, like, most of the group programming that we've done is for like CrossFit affiliate classes. Yes. So muscular. And people who were just listening to this aren't going to have any clue what just happened. Chris was making muscles. So they're very big, very impressive. And Day obviously works with some teams at the University of Arizona, D1 athletes. So different demographics, but at the same time, like, sometimes you said this before, Day, like, where sometimes very talented athletes in their sport don't move super well in the weight room. So at the end of the day, I think sometimes you deal with a lot of the same stuff that you would if you were, working in any other type of scenario. So probably some good universal things. So let's start from the very beginning. If you just have like a blank slate and you need to create programming for a group, like, what are some of the questions that sort of need to be answered, or what do you want to put in place first?
Yeah, a few things that I think of right away is, like, you think of a needs analysis. Where's the majority of the group at, and where do they need to be? What are the goals? So then you find what that gap is, and then from there you kind of do reverse engineering. So that's one of the first things I'm thinking of, is finding those gaps. And to find those gaps, you need to know what the goals are. So where are we trying to go? I know with the teams, they each have, are they a full round? Are they a year-round team where they're competing all year round? Are there specific seasons? Do we have to taper for what are we tapering for? What are the more priority games, meets, whatever? And how do we get there to get, how do we address everything that we want to address to get to that point?
How, like, nuanced do you get with like a needs analysis for different demographics within the same sport? Like, do you tailor it a lot, or is it sort of like not practical, where it's like, largely most of the swimmers are getting the same thing regardless of your distance or discipline? Or is it like you're getting more detailed and, like, working with specific individuals and things?
Yeah, that's something that I try to make it as specific as possible, but it really does depend on the size of the team and the capacity that I have. Like,
Yeah.
if I have a team only twice a week, an hour each time, like, I don't want to spend 2 weeks doing like different tests and all that. It's just going to take a lot of time. So it's like, all right, majority of them need this and this, so that's what we're going to address, like the big hitters.
Yeah.
Um,
You're like
but
triaging
most
it.
of Right, but most of the teams we do different testing and all that. And we try to get pretty specific, even with the swim team. Like, just recently, the swim team has like 60, 70 people, 70 athletes, and we run them through like functional movement screens, try to find their biggest weaknesses, so that we can incorporate that in that program. So they all have a very similar template with small specifications for things like that. And then we also have different avenues for a distance swimmer versus an IM versus a sprinter versus breaststroke. So
I'd have to assume too, Day, that like there's, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, there's probably some of it for you guys that's like, on the whole, generally, certain sports will produce certain imbalances just naturally. So it's like you can almost always. It's like, all right, I can at least fall back on working on this because 80% of the swimmers I've ever seen will have an issue with this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's 100%. Like, you know, the common injuries and like imbalances for each sport based on the demands and the repetitive movements. Like for divers, for example, like most of them have back issues just
Mm.
from all the pikes that they have to go in and all that. So it's like in their accessory block, I always include some type of back strengthening exercise. They do it, and I see them
Jefferson
3 times
curls.
a week. Yeah, yeah. So they're doing like Sorensen
Max
holds,
effort Jefferson
Jefferson
curls.
curls. Yeah. So they're doing a bunch of that stuff just because it's like, and I do it year round too because it's like they're always coming in with back issues.
Yeah.
And it's a small team, so when 4 of them have back issues, it's like, all right, that's a big chunk.
They all have back issues then.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, Chris, starting on a blank canvas, what's like the first move?
So I think I'll make one assumption first. So if I have a blank canvas and this is not a brand new gym, like we did a cycle beforehand, the first thing is like, okay, well, what did we do last cycle? Because that allows you to then look at, okay, either A, what can I build off of from the previous cycle, or what haven't we done that we should do now? Because in a class setting, a lot of it is like, okay, making sure you hit on certain things to make sure that you are keeping people strong and keeping people healthy. But I would think, and maybe I'm wrong here, Day, but in like a Gen Pop commercial class setting, you also have to keep it changing to keep people engaged, right? Because if people get bored, they're just going to stop paying and leave. So there is some of that as well. So I would look at what the last cycle did and then say, okay, these are the focuses. I'm going to try to build off of this, or we did back squats last cycle, so we're going to front squat this cycle, stuff like that. And then it's funny, I literally had this conversation with a woman who works at the gyms I work at, because she's like, I want a program for the gyms. So I was like, all right, well, send me a program. And there was a good amount of changes, but she's never done it before. And I basically said, what you want to do is, once you decide what you want to focus on for the 6 weeks, first thing I like to write out is the strength progressions, because those are the easiest to write out, right? Especially for a group class setting. It's like, cool, you're going to add 5%. You're going to add a set. You're going to, the reps are going to decrease or whatever. You can make it pretty linear. Or if you're going to change movements as opposed to percentages, basically it's pretty stream of thought. So I told her, for the strength progressions, start with those and think down the calendar. So like,
And with a group, you're probably never going to have to change it either.
Exactly.
Like if I'm working specifically with Chris and his knees hurt, I'm not just going to be like, sorry, Chris, 5 more pounds, 5 more percent.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas
Right.
like with a class, you kind of do that, right? Like it's like you modify that. It's the floor coach's job.
Yes.
If it's an affiliate class, to amend that stuff so that it meets the person at the day, and the program will run for the average, which the average hopefully is healthy.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was about to say, is like, you can't get into the weeds too much, because it's like, if you have 150 members at your gym, like you would never get a program written, right? It's like, okay, I have to just write a program that on paper makes sense, and then it's the floor coach's job to make any specific adjustments. So yeah, I like to think writing down the calendar for strength progressions, and then once you do that, then you write across the calendar for the conditionings. And so it's like, okay, if the progression we're doing the classes at our gyms right now, Mondays is a back squat focus. So we're doing cluster sets of back squats. And so 20 minutes of the class essentially is spent back squatting, or like building up to your working sets and then back squatting. So the conditioning piece is short, right? So it's a sprint-based conditioning piece. So you want to kind of work across with your conditioning pieces to make sure your time domains are different, your stimuluses are different, and then you vary the movements enough that you're not hitting certain movement patterns too many times in a week. And you can't do that working down the calendar. You have to do that working across on a weekly basis. So those are kind of the things I personally look at with, if I was to, write a program for our gyms, like that's kind of the structure I would look at.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I mean, maybe you said that before and I just haven't heard it, but like work down before you work across. I mean, that's great advice.
I came up with it on the
think
spot.
long term and like, oh, well, there you have it, folks. Stream of consciousness.
Well, not today, Ben. It was in that meeting. I was like trying to it's like cueing in class. You're like, how do I cue what I'm looking for? And in that meeting, I was like, look down and then across. And I thought the same thing. I was like, that was pretty good.
I got to remember that one. That one's
yeah.
Yeah. Code Chris, you'll save 100% on coaching content.
Totally free.
Yes.
Because essentially you're creating that long-term plan that has some of the bare bones in place, which is sort of what we talked about with the skeleton previously, where it's like you get some of the big picture items in place, maybe some of the strength progressions that you want to run. And then when you're actually in that week or you essentially go from that longer term approach working down the calendar to like working across in an individual week of like what's actually the X's and O's on the paper. And then ideally like you're in a good stream of thought where you can kind of vary the takes as you're putting through it as you're actually like writing it out. But then you can also kind of cross reference it in a class where it's like look through and like see if there's I usually would advise people to like think about how this would feel if you were to go through it. So you like lunge the day before. Do you want to squat super heavy the next day? Like maybe not. Or maybe it's fine and it's not a big deal, right? But that's the sort of thing you need to be able to go through as a coach is like how might the average person feel as they go through this? Is toes to bar a good option on this day or should we maybe do something else instead?
Yeah. I also think if you're writing your own programming for a gym, I could see people making the mistake of like, I'm a gym owner. I'm super good at CrossFit. Like, I don't know why this is a problem. And it's like, you're not the demo, dude. Like,
yeah,
it's like the guy who's like,
I'm 18.
Yeah, like he owns a gym. I'm 24. And I crush barbells. I can clean and jerk 350, but my demo is like house moms, and it's like, what do you mean you can't do this and then this? It's like, well, I'm 42 with 3 kids, and I was up with my kid throwing up last night. Yeah, and so it's like, what did you just put on this board? Like, I can't do this. So yeah, it's like you have to be really connected with who your avatar is. Like, if you were to like create a collection of all the members in your gym and make like a bell curve, what is the avatar person at that top of the bell? And you have to program for that person and then provide scaling down options as well as scaling up options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you guys typically do like scaling? Well, I would say probably obviously you do scaling, right? Because most people are going to need a variation that's easier. If you write toe to bar, there's people that can't toe to bar. How often do you write like an RX plus or like a scale up type option?
Yeah, we do that a lot. I don't know that we write it every day. But we do it a lot at our gyms.
Because there's times where you don't need it or you actually don't want it.
Right.
Like, what you're doing today is a pull up. It's not going to be a muscle up because we don't want it to be a muscle up. We want it to be a pull up.
Yep. Yeah, and a lot of times at our CrossFit style gyms, we'll call it CRX, and the C stands for competition. And it's kind of the thought process of like, if you want to compete in CrossFit, then it's like these are the things you should do, or like you can push yourself in this way. And then it's like you might have some people who could do the CRX, but it's like, and we won't tell them not to, but at the same time, it's like if you're not competing in the sport of CrossFit, do you really need to do that, or are you totally fine doing the RX, Yeah.
I think I'm going to throw this to both of you, this question. If you're just like in an average group and you're coaching them through a movement and they're obviously they're not doing CrossFit, right? They're doing a sport. and with Chris, there's going to be majority of the people are not going to ever compete in a CrossFit competition.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like, how anal are you about, you have to squat to depth, you have to fully extend your hip at the top of this box jump, like the way the textbook would want you to do a movement versus just like, this is fine movement, and like it's still sound, it's just maybe not like the textbook ideal. Like, where do you hold people to, I guess?
With me, I guess it's looking at what the intent is of the exercise and the workout and what we're trying to get out of it. Most of the time,
Yeah.
I want full range of motion. I know, like with when you're teaching, let's say an affiliate class, group class, or of that sort, a lot of times like you hold very true to the standard. But like with the athletes I'm working, I also most of the teams I work with are pretty small, so I know them pretty well, and I know if someone has like if I'm asking them to squat and they're not going to full depth, but I know this person may be like either fatigued or usually their depth isn't that great. Like I'm not going to force them into that position for safety. But the thing is, like you're also trying to get to that position of so like trying to make them aware because a lot of times people aren't aware of those things. Like they're not aware sometimes that their movement is flawed in some way. So making sure they're aware and then addressing that, like where is it? Like what is the cause of them not doing it? Is it just lack of awareness? Is it mobility issue? Is it a pain thing? And then from there addressing that.
I almost feel like, and I could be wrong on this, I almost feel like with this, it actually would be easier being in a setting like Days because it's really easy to connect those athletes to what they're really in the weight room for, right? Like these athletes and the people you work with, they're not in the weight room to be good at weight rooming. I'm in the weight room because I want to be better at swimming, or I want to be better at golf, or I want to be better at football, right? And so to shorten someone's range of motion, let's just say it's like, well, this is why we're doing this. Okay. Whereas like a great example is there was this one guy once who came in and tried a class at one of our locations, and in the class there was a gentleman who was doing, it might have been a thruster, and he wasn't going to depth. And he has like the guy who runs that gym knows he's not going to depth, and he's not going to depth because he has like something structurally going on. I don't remember the exact situation, but it's like that's what he can safely do. And the guy who tried the class ended up not signing up, and he was like, yeah, I don't want to be at a gym that doesn't enforce the standards. And it's like,
no, man. That, oh man, I've been like,
and so
yeah,
like
maybe this gym isn't for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the one guy who runs that gym was like, all right, like you don't even know this person. This is your first class. And so especially in a CrossFit setting, I do think things can get a little out of hand with that.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, if you're someone who can move well, or you fancy yourself as a competitor, then you have to hit the standards. Because otherwise, you're either shortchanging yourself from an athletic perspective, or you're just not doing what's most beneficial for you. But this is, again, where things get convoluted, because I'm sure you see this, Ben, where it's like, and Day, if you've been in CrossFit gyms, the people are like, oh, yeah, Susie said she got 50 reps, but she doesn't squat to depth. It's like,
Yep.
And so to prevent some like community like regression, it's almost like you have to enforce the standards on the people who should be doing them or are able to do them. But then but you can't be so married to that the person who physically can't get into that position right now, you're not standing there saying, it's not a good rep. Sorry. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think like a good coach, regardless of the setting, strength conditioning, CrossFit classes, whatever, it's like they hopefully have a good enough relationship with the person to understand when they're ready for, like, when the timing is right for that conversation. Because if you say, Susie, you're not squatting to depth, come on, get lower, and she's having like a really bad week and like all kinds of stuff's happened, she might literally walk out the door.
Yep.
Where there's other times where like, people need that, and obviously like you still want to move them towards like what the ideal standard would be. And I think that's the same thing for like, there's times where, you have a team and the bandwidth for them learning new things and adapting their movement is just really low because they're, handling so much volume in their current training or whatever. I feel like we got derailed a little bit from our original conversation, but I think it's still good points to bring up. I think we had kind of said about the creating a calendar, and then maybe we didn't explicitly say this, but like typically I think all three of us are going to write a skeleton for like the training block at hand. So you have this like long-term vision for where the group training is going. You kind of triage the movement or the group as to like what things are most important moving forward. And that's also kind of including looking back in the past as to like what things you've just done recently and what the person needs from a needs analysis perspective, like Dave was saying. And then you're going to create priorities for that individual training block, which might run for who knows how long. But then when you actually like go to like put in the X's and O's and like write out the programming, are there any other systems that you guys use, or are you just kind of like open to creative freedom at that point?
Yeah, I think like Chris mentioned this when as he writes, like he looks at prior, like past things that he's done. And that's where I would do as well. Like I look at previous programs I've written up for the teams, like this time of the season, this is what we did. And from there, make those adjustments based on, feedback from athletes and also feedback from performance metrics. That's one of the big things. So then like constantly evolving that, trying to optimize that training and make it better. But I do really go in there like I know in the summers when I write out the plans for the athletes, I go in there with like a open mindset where it's kind of like creative freedom. And I think one reason I do that too is just because like over the course of a year, sorry if you hear my dog barking in the background, but he's going crazy. But over the course of the year, like
Mailman.
yeah, I don't know what's going on out there. Over the course of the year, I'm like, we're going to seminars, taking more like courses, learning about different training styles, learning from what other coaches are doing, reading things, listening to podcasts, and like, you just accumulate all these notes over time, like of different strategies. So I like to go in there like, all right, this is what I did before, but also these are all new things, and just like combine the two. That gives me the opportunity of like trying new things, seeing what I'm creating, and also relying on things that I know that have worked well.
Yeah, I feel like that was actually just something that I started being more aware that like it was a system that I had used some, but I've been more intentional about it recently. Is like I feel like I've done this some with classes, but I've done it more with individual training where I'll be like, this cycle that we went through for this person where we have this thing that we've been trying, it's like a long-term development thing. Like their squatting is not up to par. We've tried to squat 8 different ways over the last 8 different cycles. And this one back here worked really well. For whatever reason, their squat just felt pretty comfortable. Felt like we were in a good rhythm at that time. Let's go back to that time and see what the skeleton was and like what the specifics of it were. And not that we have to run that exact same thing, because obviously we've learned things since then, and hopefully they're a different athlete than they were then. But you can at least pull some of the core blocks that were in place. It's like you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. Like if Murph prep went really well in 2022, better than it did in 2023, okay, let's look back and we can pull something that's useful for the next year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so for me, as far as like you said, operating a skeleton, I like to do the down and then across. The other thing you try to do, I think, in a class setting is you kind of got to make sure you vary the movements a decent amount, and then I try to make sure to not repeat movement patterns too much. There's only so much you can do in a class setting. But
that's like hard. It's challenging.
Yeah. But we have certain like rules and regulations in place. So like when we write a 6-week cycle, because we operate in 6-week cycles, one of the things we do is we say that the work in the class should be anywhere between about 25 to 35 minutes. And that's maybe including rest periods. So if you're like doing an interval workout, after like, let's say a strength session, if you were to add that all up, it should be between 25 and 35 minutes, because we found that if you're in that time frame, it allows you to maximize the hour without spilling so far over that like the coach is stressed, you can't do a cool down. So it's like that's the sweet spot. So that's like one guideline we use. Another guideline we use is, if you are going to do, like, let's use back squat and lunging as an example, right? So if we back squatted on Monday and we went heavy, and the certain workout you're writing, the way the week's going, you want to throw in lunges, and let's say you want to do that on Tuesday, like those lunges should be either unweighted or the volume should be very low, right? So basically it's like, yes, you do have knee flexion in back-to-back days, but like you did 100 lunges, but it's unweighted, right? Like you should be fine. Or, you back squatted heavy on Monday and we ended up doing thrusters, but over the course of the workout, it was only 30 thrusters. Like you're not going to be too beat up from that. So like that's stuff to think about to make sure your volume and intensity is undulating. Like you don't want to be back squatting on Monday and then you're cleaning heavy on Tuesday. Like that would be ridiculous. So that's like kind of another thing we look at. And then I try to look at also like being able to vary the movement patterns as much as you can, and defaulting to cardio or body weight movements where needed, because in my opinion, those movements offer the lowest possibility of getting injured.
Yeah. Also, they're just like the least amount of wear and tear.
Exactly.
You can get a good effect. People always feel good when they leave like an erg-based workout, but like you got felt like you got a good workout in, but you don't feel beat up. So that's a great thing to sprinkle in, especially if you're an affiliate that's got like all the bells and whistles and you got a million ski ergs and bike ergs and all the different tools that you have disposal to. Then it's like you can hit a variety of patterns and have it all be low eccentric, and the people continue to feel good, and they're not rowing 4 times a week or something.
The other tricky thing with classes, though, is like you have to also think about like the logistics, right? So it's like I said, 25 to 35 minutes. You might look at that and be like, cool, I got a workout that falls in that time frame, but let's say it's a half hour at work and you got back squats on the front end, high percentage, right? And then you put snatches in a workout at a moderate percentage. It's like, okay, well, yeah, it's 30 minutes, but you didn't factor in the fact that you need 5-10 minutes to build up to that heavy percentage. And then it's like, and then I got to warm up for a snatch, because you can't just go right into a snatch workout without doing that. So it's like, yeah, you're in the guidelines, but you're not in the spirit of the guidelines, because now all of a sudden you have all this extra warm up time that you're going to spill over. So it's like you got to, or, we had a guy write a program once, first time writing, and he had like deadlifts, double unders, and handstand walks in the workout. And the particular gym, I looked at him like, dude, where are you doing these handstand walks? Like, you literally can't. The gym is small. You can't have the barbells and handstand walks
5 foot lengths with
right,
turn around after each one.
Or shuttle runs in a workout.
Yeah.
It's like the space doesn't dictate that. So it's like that can also play into how you program. I know my boss, when he used to program for his original gym, which again is small, and he was packed having 15, 16 people in a class every day, he's like, I literally had to think I could not do wall balls in a rig movement. Just, it was out of the question, because you had too many people in too close quarters. So like that's another thing that I've seen, honestly, is probably the hardest for people who have never programmed for a class for them to learn, is the actual logistics of, okay, how is this going to look like once we hit the floor?
Yeah. 6 heats, because everybody needs their own bench.
We have that issue too with like just there's limited equipment. There's like 4 teams training at the same time. And like that's one thing I'm always thinking of is like, all right, like I have 10 athletes. There's also these many teams here. I know this team uses a track, so maybe I can't do sleds. So like what alternative is there to that? And a lot of times it's like you don't know what's happening with the other teams, and then you just kind of have to change it up on the spot, which is probably the thing I hate the most when I program for teams or classes or anything is like thinking about the logistics because you come up with this workout and you're like, oh, this is the perfect like progression or
This is what
whatever.
they need.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is it. Like they're gonna be like Olympians by the end of this program, right? And then after it's just like, oh, but you know, it's not feasible because of XYZ. You only have 60 minutes with them. There's not
Yeah.
enough of these specialty bars that we need and blah blah blah. So that gets annoying.
Chris, do you have do the coaches who write the cycle write the lesson plans? Do they write lesson plans as well, or is that someone else's job?
We don't really write lessons plans.
What?
Yeah.
So,
We
do, so then is it like warm ups and cool downs and time to build and stuff? Is that just like floor coach kind of does it on the fly, or is it
so
kind of
our
written out?
Yeah, so we have certain procedures in place across the board at the company. So it's like basically the AM coach generally will write the warm up for the workout.
Gotcha.
And most of the time, the coaches the rest of the day will just follow that warm up.
Yeah.
But we have a gross like overarching principles on what the warm up should look like. Like you should always have like some sort of thermogenic portion to the warm up. You should have some sort of dynamic portion to the warm up. You should have some sort of active mobility or something like that, muscle activation. And we kind of outlined like this is what your warm up should look like, so that if there's an element missing, the general manager could be like, Susie, what the heck? Like, you told them to just touch their toes and then go deadlift. Like, that's not going to fly here. We also go through a pretty extensive 6-week internship for new coaches. And so they know the expectations by time they come out. And then they also know what the warm-up is, because when the GM walks in at, let's say, 8 a.m., it's on the board. Like, they have to write the warm-up on the board. And so if it's not good, he or she's going to be like, well, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't go through a lesson plan for every workout, but our 6-week cycles will generally have maybe notes in it that if there's a workout that has like a different feel or element to it, it'll be in there so the coach is aware. And then our coaches are trained to be able to write their own warm-ups and cool downs if need be.
Yeah. And there's even times where like it just practically it's a lot easier to like write a warm up into the programming so it goes up on the board for like here. So like we'll have like a mini whiteboard that we like that Stacy normally or whoever opens would write the lesson plan on. And that would like include like warm up and stuff. But there's just times where like it's a lot easier for the athletes to see it versus have it said to them and then repeat it 6 times until they understand what it is. So there's times where it'll be like, just have this 12-minute warm up clock of you moving through this thing of rounds of whatever it is,
Yeah.
So there's certain times where like depending how you write the program, I guess is my point, that it almost kind of is in lieu of a lesson plan at times. Day, do you have like I'm sure there's like a block of like you have a certain window for like your teams. So do you have to like figure it out by like maybe not down to the minute, but like you have to have a pretty good idea of how long things are going to take, where like otherwise you're going to have to start cutting out pieces or like amending the program so it fits in nicely. Like I guess if I was doing this, I'd be like, oh yeah, this should be no problem to get through F by the time we're at the 115-minute mark or however long they have, and I'd totally screw it up. I mean, how does that play out?
Yeah. So I usually, most teams I have like an hour block with them. So I try to time things out. Like there's warm up block A, strength, blah, 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 all that. So I have an idea of how long it takes. And it also depends on the team too. Like I know some of the teams that I have, like it's co-ed, but there's mostly guys in it. And I know that the guys will take longer in the strength session because they're going heavier. They need more rest, where the ladies, not so much. So they tend to finish quicker. So like I keep those things in mind too. But let's say something happens where I estimated times wrong and things go a little longer than anticipated. I go down two routes. Is one, I keep the team a little longer, 10, 15 minutes to finish up, which usually doesn't happen. And I try not to happen because like there's a lot of NCAA rules where it's like you only have a certain amount of time with them and it could get into a fuzzy area. So there's that. The other part is I always try to put like the less priority things at the bottom. So if I do need to cut it out, those are cut out. And
Sorry,
so I
guys.
could,
No tib raises today.
yeah, yeah,
Oh
no
man.
tidbits. Oh,
Darn.
damn, no dead
Missed your
bugs.
bicep curls.
Oh, yeah. No, the bicep curls are up
we,
there.
we, we
They're
stayed
black
extra
white,
for those.
baby. Yeah.
I got the extra 10 minutes for the bicep curls.
Yep.
Yeah. No, it's I remember last year, like with the swim team, we'd finish up our session and they'd be like, oh, could we do the bike? Because we'd have like a optional arm farm. And
Arm farm.
arm farm, yes. I never heard that term until I got here.
I'm gonna
Arm farm.
I'm gonna use that as a workout name. for
Yeah,
Lumber
seriously.
Capital.
Yeah.
At some point, everyone, you're gonna get a workout called Arm Farm.
Yes. And so like they would stay extra for arm farm. That is not an issue.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Do either of you keep like a, maybe this is less relevant for like strength conditioning, but maybe not. Do either of you keep like a checklist of like movements that you've done recently, or just like, you know, a battery, like a library of exercises that you might want to pull from? Do you have any other systems besides just like looking back at the actual programming as to like when's the last time I did this movement or things like that?
I mean, I don't really. To be fair, I don't write programming for our gyms anymore.
Do
But
you do that for individual design clients?
certain movements.
Yeah, like for example, obviously, like say somebody's in like a limiter block and they have like, okay, we're working on, gymnastics, right? So like we're very clearly hitting these things like 3 times a week, and it's like we just want to make sure we touch on some of the other weightlifting movements, and then it's like we're only doing like sport conditioning like maybe twice a week.
Okay.
Do you like track as to like what goes in there, or is it again a little bit more intuitive? Like, you know, I think this would kind of fit well, and let's just kind of look back in the program and see when the last time you hit it was.
Yeah, I think it's more the second one for me. So if I'm working with an individual client, right, you have priorities that are the focus, right? So the first thing in the program is designed around, it's like, all right, we need to improve on these things. And so if those are the focus, everything else is kind of on maintenance.
Yep.
I've also seen, like, again, this is a gross example, right, because things can vary, but a lot of times the athletes who maybe struggle on the gymnastics side are usually stronger, right? So, I might have an athlete who is not great upper body pulling, needs to work on chest to bars or muscle ups. And so, like, all that skill work is there, but he or she might be a great squatter. And so it's like when we hit our sport-specific conditioning, at that point in time, does it really matter if it's a thruster or a wall ball? You know, it's like, not really, because they're so good at both of those, comparatively speaking. And so it's like the key is then to just make sure you touch on those. So it's like, all right, this workout, I need a squatting movement. I did thrusters last week, so we're going to hit wall balls this week. And then the next week, it's like, okay, I want to partner this with a knee flexion movement. I did thrusters and wall balls over the last 2 weeks. We haven't done any single leg in a while, so we're going to do overhead walking lunges this time, right? So that's kind of how I look at it. Especially from a sports-specific perspective in a CrossFit setting. For me, it's like you want to get as many touches on as many movements as possible. And so then if you find one that, like, your athlete is like, yeah, I really struggled with X, then I'm like, great. And I grab that movement, and I'm like, cool, we're going to see this more frequently than we were before.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, I've tried a couple different ways, and I think most of the time I end up going back to what you just did, which is like you just kind of glance back at what you did before, and provided the program doesn't have like 1,000 different moving pieces, it's not too hard to see like, oh yeah, we did, wall balls as the squatting movement in this couplet last week, so maybe we don't do that again this week because they don't need to do wall balls every week. And if it is something that you're obviously like very specifically trying to drive forward, like, hey, you're your rowing power is just trash, well, then you do it every week.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
and you're very clearly like, that is what it is. Like you're that's the thing you're driving forward. So it's becomes very simple. Whereas like if there's other things that are typically strengths for that individual, then they don't need to touch it as often for it to feel fresh when they come back to it. So like, if a person's built for squatting, they don't need to do wall balls.
Right.
They could do wall balls 0 times in this quarter. And if they do it 2 to 3 times before they're asked to really compete in it, they'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, like I've trained with athletes before, like I hated them, but they were like, "Oh, my knees have been wonky, so I didn't squat for 3 months." And then all of a sudden it's like "All right, I'm going to touch something heavy today. And my boss will back squat like 425." And it's like, "What?" So and then like you said, if you have something you're working on, you touch on it every week. And I follow pretty standard progression. So like let's use rope climbs as an example. I want an athlete to get better at rope climbs. I'll start by accumulating volume unfatigued until they've gotten better at it, and then I go to some fatigue in a cyclical setting because it's generally easier to hit a movement after getting off a rower or a run versus like a thruster. Then I'll usually incorporate some sort of body weight movement, then some sort of weighted movement, and then I'll progress that into sport-specific intervals and then a sport-specific conditioning pieces. And so it's like and then I'll usually cycle back around if it's something they really need to like spend a lot of time building on. But again, you're touching on it every single week because it's like that's the focus you're trying to build upon.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess it's sort of the same thing for groups in the sense that like you go through the same processes. It's just more for an avatar. Like you're like, what might this avatar be dealing with? Or even it could be very specific. Like even if you're at an affiliate and you're like, hey, I've had like, 3 to 4 different conversations with people who all really want to work on getting their first muscle up. Like let's do some like more positional work where people who already have them can still benefit from it, but we're going to, give some opportunities for people to continue to like learn that movement. Like again, I think it's not super complicated.
Mm.
Sweet. We'll leave it there. Nice,
Cool,
guys.
Thanks.
So
Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just started listening to the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while, I would encourage you to rate and review the show. And lastly, the best thing that you can do to support our work is also the best thing that you can do for your performance. And that is by hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.